I never imagined it would come to this. When I was a child, the orchard was more than just land, it was the heart of our family, the soil that held our memories, the scent of apples clinging to my father's old flannel shirts. It was the place where my sister, Evelyn, and I had chased each other between the trees, our laughter mixing with the rustling leaves. It was supposed to be our legacy. But standing in the middle of it now, staring at the trees that should have been heavy with fruit but instead bore the weight of neglect, I knew our legacy was dying. "David, you can't be serious," Evelyn had said when I told her what I planned to do. "You're going to empty your savings on this?" She didn't understand. Maybe she never would. I had watched the orchard wither under the weight of debt and mismanagement, watched our father grow tired, his hands weaker with every passing year. When the bank's letters became more frequent, their words sharper and more demanding, I had stepped in without hesitation. Every cent I had saved over the years, money meant for my future, for a house, for something beyond this small town, was poured into saving the orchard. I sold my car. I worked 16-hour days. I made sacrifices Evelyn never had to make. And then, when the orchard was finally back on its feet, when the trees stood tall again and the first apples of the season shone like rubies in the late summer sun, the decision was made. Evelyn was named chief director of the family business. Not me. I clenched my fists as I watched her step onto the small wooden stage at the town's annual harvest festival, her name announced with the kind of applause that felt like a slap to my face. She smiled, addressing the crowd, talking about the future of the orchard as if she had been the one to save it. As if she had been the one to bleed for it. And in that moment, I realized, there was more to this story than I had ever understood. The applause rang in my ears long after it had faded. I stood at the edge of the festival grounds, watching Evelyn shake hands and exchange pleasantries with the town's business owners and council members. She fit the role perfectly, polished, composed, effortlessly confident. Meanwhile, I stood in the shadows, my fingers curling around the stem of an apple one had plucked absent-mindedly from one of the crates. "David," a voice called from behind me. I turned to see Mr. Henshaw, the owner of the general store. He was a longtime friend of our father's, his face lined with the kind of wisdom that came from decades of hard work. He sighed, glancing toward the stage. "I thought it would be you." "So did I," I muttered, tossing the apple in my hand before catching it again. Henshaw studied me for a moment, his brows knitting together. "Did your father know?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I had assumed, no, I had been sure, that my father would have fought for me. That he would have told the town council, the investors, everyone who had a say in the matter, that I had saved the orchard. But if Henshaw was asking, that meant there was doubt. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice hoarse. Henshaw hesitated, then patted me on the shoulder. "You deserve better, son. Don't let this place swallow you whole." As he walked away, I caught sight of my father sitting at a table near the front, his expression unreadable as he listened to Evelyn give her speech. I needed to hear it from him. I weaved through the crowd, ignoring the polite nods and murmured congratulations directed toward Evelyn. My father saw me coming but didn't move, didn't offer a smile or a greeting. "Did you know?" I asked, my voice quieter than I had intended but firm enough to carry over the noise of the festival. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands together, his weathered fingers stained from years of working the land. "I knew," he said finally. The orchard felt colder than it ever had before. I stared at my father, waiting for him to say something, anything, to justify what he had done. The words hung between us, heavy and immovable. "You knew," I repeated, barely able to believe it. "And you let it happen?" He sighed, rubbing his temples as if the weight of his decision had worn him down. "David, it wasn't that simple. Wasn't it?" My voice was sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. "I spent everything I had to save this place. I worked day and night to make sure we didn't lose it. And when it finally turned around, you handed it to Evelyn." His eyes met mine, steady but tired. You don't understand. Then help me understand. I took a step closer, my fists clenched. Because right now, all I see is you giving away something I fought for. He hesitated, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker in his expression, regret? Guilt? But then, just as quickly, he masked it with a deep breath. Evelyn was always meant to lead, he said, as if that was supposed to make it easier. She understands business, she has the right connections, and the investors trust her. The orchard isn't just about hard work, David, it's about survival. And to survive, we needed someone the town believed in. I shook my head, anger burning in my chest. And you didn't think they'd believe in me? He didn't answer. And in his silence, I had my answer. I felt like a fool. For years, I had convinced myself that I was doing this for the family, for our legacy. But maybe, deep down, I had also been doing it to prove something, to my father, to the town, to myself. And now, I saw the truth, no matter how much I had sacrificed, I had never really been in the running. Evelyn had been the choice all along. I stepped back, my breath unsteady. You should have told me. I wanted to, he admitted, his voice soft. But I knew you wouldn't stop. He was right. If I had known that no matter what I did, the orchard would be hers, I wouldn't have fought for it. I wouldn't have given up everything for a dream that was never mine to keep. And maybe that's exactly why he hadn't told me. The sounds of the festival carried on in the background, laughter, music, the scent of roasted apples in the air, but it all felt distant now. David, my father said, his voice gentler now. This doesn't mean I don't appreciate what you did. I let out a hollow laugh. Funny. That's exactly what it feels like. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him in the crowd, in the orchard I had saved. I wasn't sure if I would ever come back. I didn't go back to the festival. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself walking through the orchard, my boots crunching against the dry earth. The trees stretched out before me, their branches swaying gently in the late afternoon breeze. They didn't care who was in charge. They didn't care whose name was on the documents. They only needed care, patience, and time, things I had given without hesitation. And yet, it hadn't been enough. I stopped near the old oak tree at the center of the orchard, the one where Evelyn and I had carved our initials as kids. The bark had healed over most of it, but you could still see the faint outline of DNA if you looked closely enough. Back then, we had been inseparable, dreaming of the day we'd run this place together. How had things changed so much? David. I turned to find Evelyn standing a few feet away, her festival badge still pinned to her dress. She hesitated, as if expecting me to storm off, but I stayed where I was. Thought you'd be too busy shaking hands to notice I was gone, I muttered. She sighed. I noticed. Silence settled between us. Evelyn had always been good with words when she needed to be, but now, she seemed to struggle. I didn't ask for this to happen like this, she finally said. I didn't know Dad was going to give it to you. I finished for her, bitterness creeping into my voice. Come on, Evelyn. We both know you were always the favorite. She flinched, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But she didn't. I won't pretend I don't want this, she admitted. I do. I always have. But that doesn't mean I don't see what you did for this place. I let out a hollow laugh. Yeah. And what does that mean, exactly? That you'll put my name on a plaque somewhere? She looked down, scuffing her shoe against the dirt. It means I don't want you to leave. Something in her voice made me pause. It wasn't just guilt, I had expected that. It was something else. Something that almost sounded like fear. I know you're angry, she continued, finally meeting my gaze. And you have every right to be. But I also know this orchard doesn't survive without you. I narrowed my eyes. What are you saying? She hesitated, then took a slow breath. I want you to stay. Work with me. Help run things. Maybe not in name, but in practice. I scoffed. So you get the title, and I get the work. That's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? She was quiet for a moment, then said something that caught me completely off guard. There are things about this deal Dad didn't tell you. My stomach tightened. Like what? Evelyn hesitated just long enough to make me realize that whatever she was about to say, it was big. Come to the office tomorrow, she said instead. Please. Let me explain. I wanted to press her for answers now, to demand the truth right then and there, but I could see in her face that she wasn't going to tell me tonight. So instead, I just nodded. Fine, I said. Tomorrow. Evelyn gave me a small, almost relieved smile before turning back toward the festival. As I watched her go, something in my gut told me that this wasn't just about the orchard anymore. There was more to this story than I had realized. And I intended to find out exactly what it was. I didn't sleep much that night. The orchard had always been my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the rhythm of the work. But now, it felt different. The weight of my father's decision, of Evelyn's vague warning, pressed against me like an unseen force. What hadn't I been told? By the time the morning sun crept through my window, I was already up, pacing my small kitchen. I thought about skipping the meeting altogether, about packing my bags and leaving town before I could get pulled deeper into whatever mess my family had created. But I couldn't. Not until I knew the truth. The office was quiet when I arrived. It was the same small building that had served as the orchard's headquarters for decades, its wooden walls lined with old framed photos of past harvests. I had been in and out of this place my whole life, but today, it felt unfamiliar. Evelyn was already inside, sitting at our father's desk. She looked up when I walked in, her expression unreadable. You came, she said. Figured I should hear whatever this is before I decide to walk away for good. She nodded, pushing a folder toward me. Read this first. I hesitated before picking it up, my eyes scanning the pages. At first, it looked like a standard agreement, documents regarding the transition of ownership, financial statements, contracts with suppliers. But then I saw it. A loan agreement. A large one. Signed months ago. And beneath it, our father's signature. My pulse quickened. What is this? Evelyn exhaled slowly. Dad took out a loan to keep the orchard afloat. I stared at her. We were supposed to be in the clear. The harvest was good, we had buyers lined up. Why would he do this? She shook her head. It wasn't just about the harvest, David. There were other debts. More than you realized. He didn't tell you because he knew you'd try to fix it yourself. I flipped to another page, my stomach twisting. The lender wasn't a bank, it was a private investor. And next to the terms of the agreement, there was another name. Evelyn Lawson. I felt the blood drain from my face. You co-signed this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded. I had to. No one else would lend to him. The orchard was too risky. I clenched my jaw. And what happens if we can't pay it back? Evelyn hesitated. That's the part Dad didn't want you to know, she admitted. If we default, we lose the orchard. But not just the land, everything. The equipment, the house, the rights to sell under our family name. We wouldn't just be bankrupt, David. We'd be wiped out. The room spun. This wasn't just about leadership. This wasn't about favoritism. This was about survival. Evelyn's voice softened. That's why he chose me. The investors, they wanted someone with a business background, someone they trusted to make decisions. If he had given you the title, they could have pulled their support. I sat back, gripping the edge of the desk. My whole life, I had believed that if I worked hard enough, if I sacrificed enough, I would be the one to carry on our family's legacy. But the truth was colder, harsher. It had never been about who worked harder. It had been about who they trusted. And that person wasn't me. I swallowed hard, staring at the papers in front of me. The orchard I had given everything for was hanging by a thread. And now, I had a choice. I could walk away, let Evelyn deal with the mess, and finally start over somewhere new. Or I could fight for it. Even if it meant working under my sister. Even if it meant facing the reality that I was never meant to be the one in charge. Evelyn watched me carefully. "What are you thinking?" I exhaled, the weight of the decision settling into my bones. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that we need to figure out how to save this place. Together." Evelyn let out a slow breath, her shoulders sagging as if she had been bracing for a fight. "So, you'll stay?" I looked at the papers again, my name absent from every official decision. I had poured my life into this orchard, but I had never been seen as its future. Now, with everything on the line, they needed me. I could have walked away. Part of me wanted to. But something deeper, something unshakable, kept my feet rooted to the ground. "I'll stay," I said finally. "But on my terms." Evelyn frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not just going to be some nameless worker in the background while you make all the calls." I tapped the folder on the desk. "I want a real say in what happens next. Not just advice. Authority." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she would refuse. But then she nodded. "Fine." I blinked. "Just like that?" She smirked slightly. "I'm not stupid, David. I know I need you. And you need me too." I hated that she was right. The orchard wouldn't survive without both of us. She had the business knowledge, the connections, and the trust of the investors. But I was the one who understood the land, the crops, and the people who worked here. Without me, she'd be running numbers on a business that no longer existed. We needed each other. But that didn't mean I trusted her. For the next few weeks, I threw myself into the work. Harvesting, negotiating new deals, cutting costs where we could. Evelyn focused on the financials, trying to keep the investors from panicking. The tension between us never fully disappeared, but we found a rhythm. She let me handle the workers, knowing they would follow me before they followed her. I let her deal with the bank, because, like it or not, they wouldn't listen to me. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about the decision our father had made. It was an unspoken agreement, we would work together, but we wouldn't pretend to be the close-knit siblings we once were. That part of us had been lost. Then, one evening, Evelyn showed up at my cabin with a bottle of our father's old apple brandy. She held it up with a small, cautious smile. "A peace offering?" I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For everything." She hesitated. "For not telling you the truth. For taking something you wanted. For making you feel like you weren't enough." I stared at her, trying to read between the lines. Evelyn was rarely this direct. I took the bottle from her hands, weighing it carefully before popping the cork. "You still did all of that." She winced. "I know." I poured us both a drink and lifted mine slightly. "To the orchard." She smiled faintly and clinked her glass against mine. "To the orchard." For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were standing on the same ground. But even as we drank in silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. Something bigger. The uneasy feeling lingered in the back of my mind. No matter how much progress Evelyn and I made, something about this whole situation still felt off. And I wasn't the only one who noticed. "Something ain't right," old Mr. Callahan, one of our longest-working farmhands, muttered as he loaded crates onto the truck. "I've been here long enough to know when trouble's coming, and I can feel it in my bones. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, squinting against the late afternoon sun. What do you mean? He glanced around, as if making sure no one else could hear him. Been seeing a man hanging around the orchard. City type. Nice suit, real clean shoes, not the kind of fella that comes here to pick apples. A chill ran through me. Where? Callahan nodded toward the eastern edge of the orchard, near the abandoned shed where we stored broken equipment. Couple of times now. Never comes close, just watches. When he sees me looking, he disappears. I didn't like this. The orchard wasn't the kind of place that attracted outsiders. The people who came here were buyers, workers, or locals. And yet, someone had been watching. I decided to check it out myself. That evening, as the sky turned soft with the colors of dusk, I made my way toward the old shed. The orchard was quiet, the trees casting long shadows across the ground. I was about to turn back when I saw movement near the fence line. A figure stood there, just beyond the trees. Dark suit. Hands in his pockets. Watching. I stepped forward. Hey. You lost? The man didn't move. Something about him sent a wave of unease through me. He wasn't startled, wasn't trying to explain himself. He was waiting. I clenched my jaw and marched toward him, but before I could get close, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees beyond the orchard. I could have followed, but something in my gut told me not to. Instead, I pulled out my phone and called Evelyn. She answered on the second ring. David? There's a man snooping around the orchard, I said, my voice low. Callahan saw him before, and now I did too. He's not local. Silence. Then, softly, I know. I gripped the phone tighter. You know. Evelyn exhaled. I was going to tell you. Just, not yet. Anger flared in my chest. Who is he? She hesitated. One of the investors. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. Evelyn, I said slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. What exactly did you sign us up for? She didn't answer right away. But when she did, her words sent a chill through me. David. I think we're in deeper than we realized. I gritted my teeth. Start talking, Evelyn. She sighed. The investor, his name is Vincent Harlow. He's not just some businessman. He has connections, powerful ones. That's supposed to mean something to me. It should, she said. Because if we don't pay him back on time, he won't just take the orchard. He'll make sure we have nothing left. A cold weight settled in my stomach. And you didn't think to mention this sooner? I thought I could handle it, she admitted. But now, I'm not so sure. A rustling sound made me turn back toward the fence line. The man was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. David, Evelyn's voice was tight. If Harlow sent someone to check on us, it means he's getting impatient. I exhaled slowly, my fists clenched. We were running out of time. The next morning, Evelyn and I met in the office. She looked exhausted, her usual confidence replaced with something closer to fear. We need a way out, I said. She slid a document across the desk. Harlow's terms. If we don't pay the full amount in 60 days, he takes everything. 60 days. Not enough time. Does Dad know? I asked. Evelyn shook her head. I didn't want to tell him unless we had a solution. I cursed under my breath. We need to find one. Fast. Before she could answer, there was a knock at the door. We both froze. Evelyn swallowed hard. It's him. Vincent Harlow had come to collect. The office door creaked open, and Vincent Harlow stepped inside. He was exactly what I expected, sharp suit, cold smile, and eyes that had seen too many bad deals to care about the people involved. Evelyn straightened in her chair, masking her nerves. I stayed standing, arms crossed. Mr. Lawson, Harlow greeted smoothly, glancing between the two of us. I hear you've been asking questions. I didn't respond. Evelyn cleared her throat. We're working on securing the funds. Harlow chuckled, shaking his head. Come now, Evelyn. Let's not pretend. You don't have the money, and you won't find it in time. He leaned on the desk. But I'm a reasonable man. I don't just take things, I make offers. My jaw clenched. What kind of offer? He pulled out a sleek folder and slid it toward us. A partnership. You let my people take a percentage of the orchard's revenue, permanently, and I ensure your debts disappear. Evelyn paled. How much of a percentage? Harlow smiled. 70. Rage surged through me. That's not a partnership. That's a takeover. Harlow shrugged. It's survival. He stood, adjusting his cuffs. You have two choices. Accept my offer, or fail to pay, and lose everything. Evelyn looked at me, her expression uncertain. David. No, my voice was firm. We didn't save this orchard just to hand it over. Harlow sighed. Then I expect full payment in 60 days. He tipped his head slightly. Good luck. As the door shut behind him, Evelyn buried her face in her hands. David, what do we do? I exhaled, my mind racing. We needed a miracle. Or a plan. I looked at the land beyond the office window, the orchard our family built, the home we had nearly lost once already. We fight, I said. And this time, we win.